Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Tiltman, and I am the Assistant Dean for Government Procurement at GW Law. I am delighted to welcome you today to the first in our two-part webinar series on the Defense Acquisition System. The next session will be 1 week from now on June 1st at noon and will be a panel discussion regarding the current state of the Defense Acquisition System, including whether the current process strikes the proper balance between flexibility and accountability. It will feature Lou Chiarella, Wendy Tsai, Karen Thornton, and Steve Schooner. For those of you who are new to GW Law programming, GW Law School created the academic study of government procurement law over 60 years ago when Ralph Nash and John Sabinic created the law school's government procurement law program. We offer master's degrees in government procurement law for lawyers and non-attorney acquisition professionals. And in addition to our expansive degree and course offerings, we routinely offer programming just like this for free to the public. You can check out information about upcoming and even our past events on our program website, Beyond the Far, and I'll put a link into the chat momentarily so you can check that out as well. Now for today's main event, I am thrilled to introduce you to the newest member of the GW Law faculty, Lou Chiarella, who will be teaching formations of government contracts and performance of government contracts in the fall and spring in this upcoming academic year. When not at GW, Lou is a Deputy Assistant General Counsel in the Procurement Law Division of the Office of General Counsel of the U.S. Government Accountability Office, or GAO. Since joining GAO in 2001, he has decided more than 2,500 bid protests involving challenges to the solicitation and award of contracts across the entire federal government. Also, since 2008, Mr. Chiarella has been a member of the GAO Contract Appeals Board, where he adjudicates contract disputes involving legislative branch federal agencies. And to save time so we can get to the main event, I encourage you to take a look at Lou's bio on our program page so you can read about his incredibly rich history with the Army as well. So with that, I'm going to get out of the way and I'm going to introduce you and welcome Lou to our series and let you take it away. Thank you, Lou.
Thank you, Jessica, for having me here today. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for this webinar. We hope that you didn't sign up for it just because it was free, but also because it's informative about the subject that we're going to cover. And the subject that we've going to cover today is as applicable, as important to non-lawyers as it is to lawyers in terms of understanding the defense acquisition process and the big picture. With that, let me go ahead and pull up my screen and share my screen, and I will kind of minimize myself because I don't need to see myself talking. But let me go ahead and put this up. So what are we going to cover today? This is intended, as mentioned, to be an introduction into the big defense acquisition system. This is going to be a 2-hour or roughly an hour and 45-minute overview of the process. And as Jessica mentioned, next week, we're going to follow it up with a panel discussion, myself and 3 other individuals, to actually have a substantive discussion about the good things and the bad things, the good, the bad, the ugly, the pros and cons of the current system, and where it goes. All right, with that in mind, let's jump in and discuss the topic. Okay, so why is there a defense acquisition system? Well, because it's needed. This is the system by which DoD kind of determines what it needs to buy, when to buy, how to buy it, what it needs to procure. And it's huge. There are thousands, probably tens of thousands of DoD employees and support contractors who are involved in this process, let alone the contractors who DoD actually uses in order to procure hardware, software, systems, etc. And why is it so important? Well, first of all, it's big. DoD is one of the largest consumers of goods purchased the DoD annual budget exceeds the annual revenue of both Amazon and Walmart combined. Why else is this important? Because this is what senior DoD leadership is going to focus on. This is what the Congress focuses on. And somebody mentioned that Congress is really DoD's board of directors. And I would say, yeah, that's a pretty good analogy of the relationship between the Defense Department and the Congress. And as a result of the importance and the size of these procurements, what happens? Well, legislation is enacted and internal DoD policy guidance is created that is often because of or crafted with regard to these major system acquisitions. Often, that policy guidance, that legislation applies to all procurements, but why was it created to begin with? Because of these major system acquisitions. And that's why this is so important to DoD, to the Congress, and and hopefully to many people who are involved in this process. All right. Giving you an idea of the size of the major system acquisitions that we're talking about. Every year, the audit side of GAO, and as Jessica mentioned, I work on the bid protest side of GAO when I'm not at GW. I'm focusing on the disputes. You award a government contract, it's going to make somebody happy. Everybody else who competed, submitted a proposal, those unsuccessful offerers are unhappy. That's what I do. I adjudicate the disputes involving the solicitation and the award of government contracts. That's not GAO's primary mission. It's almost like an additional duty assigned to GAO. GAO's primary mission is to do audit work on behalf of the Congress. So GAO is the congressional watchdog. It provides Congress with nonpartisan, fact-based assessments, both financial audits and performance audits. And one of the areas in which GAO does an annual assessment on behalf of the Congress is weapon systems. So you can see here, and this is the GAO 2021 report. It comes out annually in June, so I don't have the 2022 report yet. But from 2021, you can have an idea of the size of the major system acquisitions, the weapon programs that are the big programs within DoD. So in terms of the current major defense acquisition programs, there are 84 of them. And the total planned investment. Now, when we mention investment, what we're talking about is R&D and production. Designing, building, developing, building, producing the systems, getting them fielded. This does not include sustainment. This does not include operations. This does not include improvements down the road. This is getting the programs of these 84 programs through R&D and through production. And that by itself is almost $1.8 trillion across all services and across other DoD components. There are 6 future major defense acquisition programs that are on the horizon that have not, they're conceptually there. They have requirements, but have not began as an acquisition program yet. There is an associated $15 billion of planned investment, R&D and production. And then there are 17 current quote, middle tier acquisition programs. They either involve rapid fielding or rapid prototyping or both. They are not the major defense acquisition programs because either of their size or because their technology does not have to go through the same developmental process. And for those 17 programs, mid-tier acquisitions, that's another $30 billion. So for the top 107 programs. It is $1.837 trillion. So what we're talking about here is huge. It is huge. I mean, this is, you know, the amount that is here is something that you can see why these top 110 programs drive congressional focus, drive DoD's focus, because they're so big that you can't afford to fail, that you need them, you know, that you often are so focused on these programs that, you know, the next, you know, there are hundreds of thousands of acquisitions that occur a year that collectively don't add up to anywhere close to the top 110 programs. And that's why we have such focus upon these programs. All right. Now, here, I'm not going to give you a test. I'm not going to ask you to remember everything that's on this slide, other than I want to show you that over the last almost 40 years, from 1984 to 2022, there has been a consistent congressional effort to find the sweet spot between discipline and flexibility in the defense acquisition program. I mean, you can go back, you know, to as far as when the FAR was created in 1984, or when Goldwater Nichols was passed in 1986. What DoD and what the Hill are trying to do is find that sweet spot between discipline in the process and flexibility in the process, because both are needed. And, you know, therefore, we just keep trying to tweak the process. We keep coming up with studies and reports. Are we finding it? Is there not enough inputs, ownership by the military side of DoD in terms of requirements? You know, is there enough flexibility in the process? Are we creating something that actually prevents fielding? Because the programs that we're talking about, I mean, they don't take years to develop and, you know, they're around for, you know, a short period of time. They often, in some instances, will take a decade or so to go from concept to fielding. And then they're going to be around for, I was thinking about, well, you know, decades? No, generations. I mean, you look at, let's take 3 examples of major defense acquisition programs that have existed. You take the B-52 bomber for the Air Force, which was developed like in the 1960s, and the fact that it's still around some 60 years later. The Army's M1 main battle tank was developed in the late 70s, and fielding began in the early 1980s. And we're still using it with no end in sight. And the same with, on the Navy, the Arleigh Burke class destroyer. There are about 70 of them that have already been, I would say fielded, but the Navy would say put into service. It's a little hard to field a vessel, but put into operational use, with another 10 to 12 being, contemplated. And, you know, these systems are not cheap. You know, the Army's M1 battle tank might be 10 million a copy, but I would say that to buy an Arleigh Burke class destroyer, each of them is roughly $1.8 billion. So we're not talking a cheap system. In fact, it isn't just a system. It's a system of systems that are then wrapped together into a 500-foot boat or a ship and put out there as the workhorse of the Navy. So clearly, you know, these are big and lengthy programs. All right. So what is the defense acquisition system? Really, it's 3 systems. And those 3 systems are requirements, think what do we need, resources, think money, and requisitioning. All right, I mean, I had to come up with 3 R's. So requisitioning isn't a great word, but it does give you an idea of what we're talking about. We're talking about acquisitions. We're talking about contracting. So here you can see there is one system in place that deals with requirements. And that there is a process. The formal name for the requirements system is, and I'll say this only once because nobody uses the whole word, they just use the acronym, Joint Capabilities Integration and Development System. That's really a mouthful. So when talking about requirements, everybody says JCIDS, and JCIDS is synonymous with how requirements are developed. So there is a system for requirements development. Second, there is within DoD a resourcing system, money. So here we're talking about money, planning, programming, budget, and execution, PBBE. So again, we create an acronym. It doesn't exist unless we create a cool acronym to support it. And that's when we're talking about PBBE, we're talking about the money. Show me the money or the resources. And then there is the Lou's word, requisitioning, but what we're talking about is acquisition management. And it is those 3 systems that together collectively are the big defense acquisition system. Here is a diagram showing the big DoD acquisition system. And you can see each of these different circles within the big circle is one of those 3 systems. So in the bottom left-hand corner, we have JCIDS, which is the requirements development system. We have up at the top PBBE, money. This is your budgeting or financial management system. And then we have in the blue circle, the defense acquisition system, and that is acquisition management. So you can see now that we have, and DoD will often talk about it as little a and big A. Little a refers only to the defense acquisition system, meaning acquisition by itself. Big A refers to all 3 systems combined. And you can see there in the middle of the circle is the PM or program manager. And the program manager is that individual with overall responsibility for a specific acquisition program. So there would be a PM assigned to every one of those 110 major defense acquisition programs that we saw on the previous chart. And the PM is that individual who is trying to balance requirements with money, with resources, with the acquisition system, with acquisition management. A good way to think of the PM is really the point person in this whole process. You know, as mentioned, there's a PM for each individual program that exists. I'm a big James Bond fan. There was a movie not too long ago where somebody referred to James Bond and said, you know, Mr. Bond, you are a kite in a hurricane. And that would be a great way to understand the role of a PM. You are the kite in the hurricane, trying to balance all of these different communities, all of these different interests, one group of people who own requirements and are telling you what they need acquired, another group of people telling you what what budgets you have or don't have, and another group of people who actually are managing and overseeing the acquisition, doing acquisition management. All right, with that having said, I wanted to expose you to how the process works. Now, if you take away any slide from this presentation, this is the most important one. This is the most important slide, and we'll break it down piece by piece in terms of what the snake chart represents. I have to tell you, I did not create the snake chart. I cannot take credit for the snake chart. The snake chart was actually the product of a GAO attorney and a Army Reserve JAG by the name of Kurt Gurka. Kurt created the snake chart, and I think the snake chart is the best overall representation of the different, of the whole process and the different lines of effort involved. Now, let me go ahead and now simplify the snake chart, and then we'll go back to the snake chart. So the snake chart, a simplified view of the snake chart might look like this. So one is synonymous with the other. The snake chart basically represents all the steps that are involved in the process. And the first step is the idea, defining, coming up with an idea of what is needed in terms of a new material requirement. And then you have research and development. And following research and development, you have testing, developmental testing, and then you go through engineering, and then you finally produce it. You go to production. After production, what happens? Well, this material is fielded and used. And finally, at some point in time, maybe not in our lifetime, but at some point in time, it is finally disposed of, it ends. That's what the snake chart represents in terms of its, in terms of what it looks like. So going back to the snake chart, so you have an idea of what the snake chart is supposed to do and what it represents from concept all the way through eventual fielding and disposal. So looking at the snake chart as a whole, you can see that there are different lines of effort. So you have the green line, and the green line represents requirements, concepts, requirements, what it is, how we came up with a material concept all the way through its development and production and fielding. So that's what the green line represents. We have a blue line, and at first there is no blue, but eventually blue picks up. And the blue line represents technology. So the blue line represents, from start to finish, the blue line represents research and development, it represents technology. And then we have the yellow line. And the yellow line didn't start until we made the first turn, but the yellow line represents the acquisition process. And it is all three processes that define DAS, and it is all three processes that have to work, sometimes in parallel, sometimes together, sometimes not together, that to make the system work. Now, there are triangles on the chart, and the triangles, all of the triangles on the chart represent events. There are also stars on the chart, and those stars, those 5-pointed stars, we'll go with the 5-pointed stars first, those represent big events. And then we have a few black, they're like North Stars or polar stars, and those represent really, really, really big events. So in terms of understanding those stars, both the 5-starred stars and the polar stars as well, each one of those stars has a gatekeeper. And it's a choke point on the system. It's a decision point, and it's a choke point on the system. And in order to ensure that the gatekeepers get things right, there's lots of documentation and pre-decisional working groups and inputs from all stakeholders that have to be taken into account and synthesized and thought about before each of those gatekeepers makes a decision. And sometimes the gatekeepers are so, the gatekeepers have their own flags. So that's why you have on the chart here, you have these little coded flags, because the gatekeepers have their own flags. So you can see there, right there on the top right-hand corner, that there are a series of different flags, and you can count the number of stars on the flags. We're talking a 4-star within the service, and this would be an Army 4-star, and usually the Army 4-star that's involved in the requirements process is going to be the not the Army Chief of Staff, but the Vice Chief. Likewise, the flag that is, you don't have to memorize it, but again, what we're talking about is the blue flag. We're talking about the Joint Chiefs of Staff now, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is not usually involved in the requirements part as much as the deputy chairman or the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs for these programs. So yes, every time you see a flag, and you can count the stars, we're talking a 4-star review. And for other decision points, maybe they don't have their own flag, but again, they are both a gatekeeper and they are a choke point on the system. So again, as mentioned, if you decide to keep any one slide from this presentation, if you decide to print any slide, blow it up and put it on your wall, this is the one. This is the one that you should take away so you understand the steps in the process, both the requirements process, the technology process, and the acquisition process. And it is really all three of them that often work in tandem or in parallel that together tell you where a system or where you are in the defense acquisition system. All right, so as covered already, what we're talking about is one represents, that's the big snake chart is what that one is there. All right, now here are really the dimensions, the different dimensions of the different parts of the big defense acquisition system. So we have, and again, we're not going to memorize this, but I'm going to tell you, there's one system for requirements management. And within DoD, within the services in DoD, there are thousands, maybe tens of thousands of employees and support contractors involved in requirements management. At the other end of the table, you have resource management, money. And again, you've got large number of people who are responsible within DoD, together with contractors that support the effort to do resource management. And then in the middle of the table, we have little a, both program management and contract management. And most of us, when we think about contract law or procurements, are thinking about only contract management, that it involves the FAR and the different people in the procurement process, and how decisions are usually, a contract is a decision, the issuance of the solicitation is a decision, and what the focus is. But that is, as shown here, is one small slice of little a, which is one small slice of big A. All right, so let's walk through the chart, the snake chart, and the different parts. Now, it all starts with identifying a need. So when we're talking about identifying a need and the JSIDS process, what we're talking about is, well, is there, so there is JSIDS, the JSIDS process represents this joint capability process. And there is, when we're talking about the JSIDS process, two key documents. There is the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, JROC. That's the group that makes the decisions. And there is a charter for the JROC, the council that makes requirements decisions. And then there is a manual for the operation of the JSIDS the JSIDS process. These are internal policy guidance. These are not, they take into account statutory enactments. So if Congress mandates something, no doubt it better be reflected in one or both of these documents, either in the JROC charter or in the JSIDS manual. And these are complex, lengthy documents. The JROC charter for the process is like 115 pages long. The JSIDS manual is like 350 pages long. I mean, we are talking about again, trying to balance discipline and flexibility in all three parts of the defense acquisition system, including the requirements process. And both of these have been updated over time. There was an update in 2015, the last update was 2018. So make sure that you have the most, you can find these on the DAU website. We'll send you links as well. But if you're if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty about how the JROC Council works or how the JSIDS process as a whole works, this is your guidance. All right, so how does the JSIDS methodology works? So this is both, if we went back, this is both identifying the need as well as designing it, the first two parts of the snake chart. So there is a comparison that takes place. What the US military needs to be able to do versus what the US military can currently do from a capability standpoint, what the US military needs to be able to do in terms of being capable of and what it is currently capable of. And the difference represents a capability gap. And that's what the methodology focuses on. It doesn't automatically focus on what do we got to buy. It focuses on what's the capability gap. Now, part of this within each service is looking to the future and deciding who within each of the military services owns the future. I mean, you're taking into account intelligence, both regarding current and future capabilities of potential adversaries, and figuring out, based upon current and future capabilities of potential adversaries, what the US military needs to be able to do versus what it is currently able to do. And the delta, the difference, represents a capability gap. So you're doing a capability-based assessment, and you are documenting current needs and the process associated with that. So you're developing concepts, you're conducting functional analysis by area, and you're conducting functional needs assessments by area. And this is all about identifying the capability gap. The next step is, well, how do we solve the gap? How do we bridge the gap? And it's not always, what do we buy? Because there is the process where you look at and consider solutions. You might consider a material solution, but there is also considering non-material solutions to solving that capability gap. So what we have here, and what is often talked about, is .mil PF. It used to be .mil PF. It used to be .mil, and then I remember that. And then it was .mil PF. Then it became .mil PFP. So another acronym, but we're talking about here is thinking about, well, would a non-material solution solve the capability gap? And you can see here, .mil PFP stands for doctrine, organization, training, materiel, leadership, personnel, facilities, policy. So you can see here from the little chart, even after you've determined that there is a capability gap, you've done this capability-based assessment, the first thing that you look at is, well, could that capability gap be overcome with a non-material solution? Do we change how the Army is organized? Do we change training? Do we change the number of people we need to accomplish a mission? Do we change facilities? Do we change policy? And looking at all these non-material solutions is a great idea, because a lot of times they're cheaper and a lot of times they're faster to implement than a material solution. So you're considering a whole range of non-material possibilities to solving as possible solutions to overcome that capability gap. And that is often choice number one. Choice number two is, well, no, even if we changed, there's nothing we can do in terms of changing doctrine or organization or training or leadership or personnel to make up for a capability gap other than material. So choice number 2 is you've got you're making a material solution as opposed to a non-material solution. Now, when you do choice 1, non-material solution, it's often referred to as a .mil.pf change recommendation, where you're looking at changing something other than what you buy. And that's choice number 1. So when they talk about a .mil.pf change recommendation, it's like, well, we picked a non-material solution. But if none of that would work and you had to go with choice number 2 and it's a material solution, then the document that comes out of that is you're developing what is called the initial capabilities document. And that ICD basically is the first document that is created when contemplating a material solution to an existing requirement. So what goes into what is in an ICD or an initial capabilities document? Well, you're identifying the gap or set of gaps that exists. You're describing your evaluation of different material and non-material solutions that were considered. And you are then going to take this document and staff it. You are going to run it through the process, both at the service level and at the joint level, if it's a big enough program. And you're going to discuss why DoD or the service needs to pursue a material solution to remedying a capabilities gap. So that's what it is. You're recommending pursuing a material approach, and you're describing the requirements that need to be in the item being procured to resolve the capability gap. So you're doing those 2 things. And no doubt an ICD or an initial capabilities document will include the analysis of alternatives, how you looked at all the .mil.pf, other ways and considered, no, none of these other things, we considered them all, and no, we need to pursue a material solution. All right, so what does that ICD, what happens with that initial capabilities document? It gets staffed through the JROC process. Now you can see here, there's a lot of process. There's a lot of working groups and different gatekeepers, even before it gets up to the JROC itself. So you have there at the bottom of this chart on the left-hand side, the functional capability, we have FCB, Functional Capability Board Working Groups. And these by functional area are a standing working group that is going to look at ICDs, initial capability documents, to make sure that they're prepared and ready for further staffing, and you're going to prioritize the work. You then have the functional capability boards themselves that again are going to review documents, prioritize portfolios, make recommendations, and now we're talking the 1-star or the 2-star level for these functional capability boards. Above that, you have the joint capability board. We are now at the 3-star level, where we are validating the documents. And this is the Joint Capability Board is probably going to be a standing board that assists the JROC, and the JROC itself, the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, is at the 4-star level. Also, for many, many programs, either because of their size or otherwise because of their importance, the DoD does not think of the services individually. It's all integrated, it's all joint. I mean, the services, yes, stand alone. There is an Army and there is a Navy and in the Air Force, but they fight together. They often train together. And the requirements for the services have to be thought of collectively or jointly. And as a result, either given the size of a system or the importance of the system, maybe it's going to be an Army system, but the Army's decision to procure whatever the Army wants may often involve a joint review process to see how it fits into the joint umbrella of requirements and making sure that it's consistent with joint the joint needs of the services. So we'll talk a little bit about the functional capability boards. This is usually at the, the standing boards, the bottom of the chart here. We're talking about it being at the kernel or at the kernel level, but the working groups and then the functional capability boards themselves are at the 1-star or 2-star levels. And the functional capability boards kind of look at requirements by functional area. One looking at cyber, one looking at force application, one looking at logistics, one looking at integration. So you have battle space awareness, meaning can you see and understand, this would be often, C4, ISR, command control, communications, computers, informations, what is the rest of it? Reconnaissance. So you're looking at requirements by functional area. And, this started with the working groups at the kernel level. The functional capability boards are at the 1-star, 2-star level. And then from there, they move up up to, in some instances, the 4-star level, the JROC for approval. And you can see all the, the membership. Here are all the stakeholders, the services, the combatant command representatives, somebody from the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, somebody from the OSD Intel, the DoD Chief Information Officer. There is CAPE, and we'll talk a little bit more about CAPE, which is a DoD agency, and it's an office within the Secretary of Defense that is cost assessment and program evaluation. And CAPE is basically an independent assessment office and for all programs on behalf of OSD. So you could see lots of different stakeholders in this functional process before it gets up to the 3-star functional, the joint capability boards and the JROC itself. And now when you're pursuing a Materiel solution, what you're talking about is not capability gaps anymore or capabilities that we're lacking. We're now turning those into requirements. So you're talking about key performance requirements, key system attributes, and there should be a traceability between the key performance parameters or requirements of the Materiel solution and the capabilities that were, or the capability, the capability need that was identified earlier during the identifying need and designing it process. All right. For every major defense acquisition plan process, if you're pursuing a Materiel solution, there will be, for that system, on the requirement side, key performance parameters, key system attributes, and maybe additional performance attributes. There are, per statute, and now in the JROC charter and manual, 4 key performance parameters that must always be thought about, and they are statutory in terms of any new major defense system. And those 4 mandatory key performance parameters are system survivability, force protection, energy, and sustainment. So system survivability, okay, how well will this system survive on the battlefield? Force protection is a little bit different. It's how well will the operators survive on the battlefield. So you're talking not about the survivability of the system, but of the operators of the system. And then energy and sustainment must also be taken into account, associated as key performance parameters, regardless of major system being bought. Also, in many instances, these key system attributes and performance parameters are expressed in a objective and threshold manner. This is the threshold requirement, and this is the objective requirement. This is what we want it to do. This is what at least it has to do. So you're establishing both an objective standard as well as a threshold standard for each of the key performance parameters. All right. And you have to realize that there's a lot of, even when you're buying hardware, it's not usually hardware alone. There's usually software with the hardware. So there's often a need to think about the key performance parameters associated with software, as well as just the hardware of the system as well. And again, it's not like when you picked a material solution, it wasn't going to have an impact on the other parts of .mil PF. So you often have to think about training as a performance characteristic or an attribute or an aspect associated with a material solution. All right. So what happens now? Well, after that ICD, that initial capabilities document has gone through the JROC process, and the JROC, or the Army, for the major systems, the JROC has approved the ICD. What happens then? Well, we've turned the curve and we are now into development. You can also see this is when it actually becomes an acquisition. So up until now, there hasn't been an acquisition management. There hasn't been an acquisition process because you were just contemplating identifying the capability gap and the need, and you went through an analysis of material and non-material solution possibilities. But once you've approved that ICD, you've turned the corner, and now you have the requirements process still continues, but now it's been joined by an acquisition process and a technology process, the R&D process. So now you've got three lines of effort all going on simultaneously. And this is when we are now getting into little a, the defense acquisition system, little a part of it, because you're now developing something. You're developing a material solution. And there are different ways that you will do that, but there is no doubt DoD guidance on the little a defense acquisition system. So the defense acquisition system is a management framework. It's an acquisition management framework for the acquisition parts of the process. The program manager is the point of contact, the kite in the hurricane, and no doubt the PM not only is charged with executing, but the process, the acquisition process, but the program manager often is that individual who helps shape or tailor the process for that particular acquisition. There is no one right or only one solution, and therefore, given how fast the item is, what the technical maturity of associated with the material solution is, am I buying something off the shelf? Am I buying something that can be rapidly fielded? Is it an urgent requirement that we need to field quickly? And when we're talking quickly, even for urgent requirements, we're talking 2 years or less, 6 months to 2 years. When we're talking mid-tier acquisitions, which might have rapid development or rapid fielding, we're talking 5 years or less. And for major system acquisitions, we're talking more than 5 years, sometime 10 years between concept and fielding. All right. So the defense acquisition system is broken down into phases, and it has decision points, and those are called milestones. And then sometimes the phases are further subdivided into different efforts. And in the acquisition management process, you basically have two individuals. You have the program manager, and you have the MDA, the Milestone Decision Authority. The program manager is like the captain of the team. And the MDA, the Milestone Decision Authority, is like the coach. And one provides, one is doing day-to-day running with the ball, solving the problems, making sure to keep three communities happy: the requirements community, the resource community, and the acquisition community happy. And the Milestone Decision Authority is like the reviewer. That's the individual who gets to be the gatekeeper and decide, do things move on? Is it mature enough from a technology standpoint to move forward to the next phase in the acquisition process? There is there's the DoD instruction and a DoD directive that provide guidance for the defense acquisition system. And the DoD directive is 5000.01, the corresponding DoD instruction is 5000.02, and both have been recently changed, updated, and the new DoD instruction, 5000.02, was effective January 2020. So a little bit more than 2 years old. And again, you're trying to balance discipline and flexibility. So it's got a nice, cute name. It's called the Adaptive Acquisition Framework. Yeah, that's what they named it. They didn't want to name it DAS anymore. It's the Adaptive Acquisition Framework. And it envisions that there is no one path. I have one snake chart, but what the new DoD Adaptive Acquisition Framework represents is, well, there's different acquisition paths. And those are, an urgent capability acquisition path, a mid-tier acquisition path, the major capability acquisition path, which is, the granddaddy of them all. And then there are different ones for software, business systems, or services. And they have a nice, cute diagram in the new DoD, in the new DoD instruction. And this is an attempt to show how the different acquisition paths can be, how they relate to each other, and how the PM can pick any of them. There's one pathway for urgent capabilities, another one for mid-tier, then there's your major system one, and that's the most complex one, and that's the one we'll talk about. And then there are other ones for software and business systems, not weapon systems, but business systems and services. So that's the nice, cute diagram that's in the new DoD instruction in DoD 5000.02. I think my diagram is cuter, and no doubt I think it's more informative as well, because it shows not just the acquisition path, but it also shows the requirements path as well as the technology path. All right, so here is the major capability acquisition path. And this is the one that is currently in the DoD, and all the different steps or phases involved. The old one was actually better. So I actually like the old one better than the new one. And I'm going to show you what the old one was. I mean, it was just the same, except it, basically put more information on the chart. And you can see here that it has the same different phases in the path. And the phases are tied to basically to technology, to technical maturity, to technological maturity. And then based upon that, you can see where you are. So, the first thing that you see there on the left of the chart is the fact that, there was the ICD, the Initial Capabilities Document. And that's what the JROC, the requirements folks, approved, which is essentially, then you've made a starting point into a material solution, and you will have a corresponding material development decision on the acquisition side. You then have different phases, and these phases, there's going to be an R&D phase, concept R&D, very, focused R&D in the next phase, which talks about technology maturation and risk reduction. There's another phase. Now you're moving into engineering and manufacturing development. There's another phase, production and deployment. And then, you have operations and sustainment. And those phases are broken down, and there are gates between the phases that are referred to as milestone. So milestone A means you're essentially beyond just the first material solution analysis phase, and you're moving into more, into more specific R&D phase. Milestone B is a big milestone. Milestone B is the difference between, phases 2 and 3, which means you've reached a level of technical maturity and development where you can now start actually thinking about not just prototyping, but actually building more than one of these things to see, how do we engineer it? How do we manufacture it? How do we actually getting really close to production? So milestone B really represents a big mental shift between an R&D effort and something that's mature enough to be taken into what is a pre-production effort. And then milestone C actually represents the transition between pre-production and production. And you can see here that we have these different phases and we'll talk a little about what each of them means in the process. All right, so here's kind of a nice, cool diagram showing how the JSIDS process, where it starts much earlier in the process than the little a acquisition process. The president is going to put out strategic guidance that, that every year, not every year, but the president will put out the national security strategy. Based upon that, the Secretary of Defense puts out the National Defense Strategy. Based upon that, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs puts out the National Military Strategy. And those three pieces of strategic guidance, the National Security Strategy, President, National Defense Strategy, SecDef, the National Military Strategy, the Chairman, will provide the strategic guidance that then results in, well, what capabilities do we need to have that we don't already have, and starts the requirements process, which is a precursor then to the acquisition process as well. All right, so the first phase, material solution analysis, what you're looking at is different material solutions, and you actually may conduct different analysis of material alternatives. So, we now have, okay, we could go with this approach, this technology, we could go with this one. You're conducting an analysis of alternatives among different material solutions. From an acquisition standpoint, the service acquisition executive will pick the PM and say, tag, you're it. This is your program. This is what you're responsible for. And no doubt, part of this process, the first phase here in the acquisition process, will mean the development or a material development decision review. And that's kind of simultaneous or coexistent with the initial capabilities document. From a requirements standpoint, we have a corresponding entry into the acquisition system from a material development decision. All right, the analysis of alternatives is really important because you're looking at a range of options. You should be looking at a range of different technologies. You've decided you need a material solution, but you haven't decided, well, what material solution yet? So you're looking at an analysis of different material, the AOA, the analysis of alternatives, is to look at the pros and cons of each different alternative solution that might might render the key performance attributes that fill the capability gap. And you develop, the program manager also develops an acquisition strategy. The PM prepares it, the milestone decision authority, the MDA, who we talked about as the gatekeeper, the choke point on the process, the boss for this acquisition has to approve the acquisition strategy, and the acquisition strategy should lay out schedule, performance objectives, timeline, approach, technologies, funding. Each and every part of the entire acquisition should be thought through and put into the strategy. Now we're into step two. Phase two is, now we're talking, the step from milestone, we get past milestone A, and we're now into tech maturation and risk reduction. It's a more guided and focused approach. You're determining appropriate technologies. You're talking about how they're going to be integrated into any system. You might have competitive prototyping. I saw one example where the Navy was buying a new ship, a new anti-ballistic missile radar system for the destroyers that it was fielding. And they went through competitive prototyping. They awarded multiple contracts to multiple contractors, each of which were cost reimbursement R&D type contracts. And the result was the development of multiple prototypes, one by Company A, Company B, Company C. I think it actually was. It was Lockheed and Raytheon and Northrop. This was a while ago. And each of them was given money to develop a prototype. So we are going through competitive prototyping at this stage. When the technology supports it, the next stage in the process is refining it. When you get through milestone B, what we're now talking about is engineering and manufacturing development. EMD is kind of not only the most expensive stage in the R&D process, but getting through milestone B and into EMD really is, where a lot of programs don't make it. It just dies on the vine because it's not ready for prime time. The technology is not there to go into EMD, and a review just indicates, no, let's not we're not ready yet to go from milestone A to milestone B. We're not ready yet to go from from an R&D effort into an EMD effort. And no doubt this is the most expensive phase, but it does represent a real threshold. This is a mature program now. It's not just a program of record where we're spending money and pursuing different R&D concepts. It is mature enough now where we are now into EMD. I really should find out, and I'll have to look at this, what percentage of programs do make it through milestone B and what percentage don't. What percentage of time do you actually clear that milestone and those that do not? Now, EMD, even when there's competitive prototyping, you might now be awarding a contract where and I saw this on the program that I was talking about, what the Navy did for its anti-ballistic missile radar technology is it said, okay, there's 3 of you, and I've been funding your R&D efforts now for the last X number of years. This is how we're going to decide who gets the one EMD contract. And what we're going to do is I will give you a wargaming scenario. You find yourself a supercomputer. You model your prototype against my wargame scenario using a supercomputer. You turn in the results. The results are your technical proposal. That's how the Navy made a decision, not only to proceed, but how to proceed from a R&D phase into an EMD phase. And the amount of EMD was, everyone's been playing with a few $100 million up until now. Now we do EMD, and the EMD phase is like $4 billion. EMD, and maybe it had a low rate of production as well, but clearly real money. Once you get through that, the engineers, you're integrating systems, the engineers are seeing how things work. The next phase is producing it, testing it, delivering it. So production. Okay, we are now through engineering, we are now into producing actual units. It's not a prototype, it's not a couple of prototypes. We are actually building units that are going to be fielded. And associated with production, the first part of production is you do low rate initial production, LRIP, LRIP 1, LRIP 2. We're not, and this kind of establishes a production base, a manufacturing base for the contractor, and simultaneously it produces a low number of units, which the DoD is going to use for its initial operational test and evaluation. I mean, there's lots of testing that goes on. There's developmental testing, but now we're talking operational testing, and operational testing is usually independent operational testing. Does it work? There might be live fire testing. Does it work as required? Letting service members play with units. But the testing is completely independent. Here, operational testing is completely independent of the requirements community. So there is a concern for independence in the operational test and evaluation process. And therefore, you might have a low rate production so that soldiers can play with the unit and see how it works and give feedback, but simultaneously, the operational testing will be independent testing. And then you get into full rate production and fielding, and simultaneously there is often the first unit equipped for this item, for this material solution. First unit, we're talking usually scheduling. Well, how is it going to be fielded? Who gets it first? Why? Does it go to the schools, for training? Does it go to units in the field? How do we split it up? So you're talking about delivery. And then you have initial operational capability and then full operational capability. Usually now you've fielded enough where you've got a battalion-sized unit that, say 500 to 800 soldiers in a battalion-sized unit that has initial operational capability. And then finally, once all units have gotten have received the item that's being fielded, now you're at FOC as well. So those are gates in the production and fielding process. Now, operation, and that's what you measure when you're measuring, when we were talking about dollars earlier, we were talking about dollars on R&D and production. We've produced it. If we go back to the snake chart, we're through the phasing chart here. We've gone through R&D, we've gone through production. Now the units have it. These units, military units, be it a ship, a plane, a tank, whatever it is, it's out there. It's in service. And that's what those dollars represented, R&D and production. The most expensive phase in these life cycles is not R&D, it's not production, it's operation and sustainment. This is, total life cycle, and operation and sustainment or support. What we're talking about here is, maintaining it, repairing it, improving it, upgrading it, making sure that it is ready, it's operational. And these things can go on for decades in terms of operations and sustainment after they've been fielded. And this is no doubt a part of the process that has to be thought about. What's our sustainment strategy going to be? Hopefully that was thought about way back early on when you were buying production of the items. Are we going to buy data rights associated with the item that is being produced so that the sustainment is not in a non-competitive environment? All of these things had to be thought about as part of the acquisition strategy, thought about by the PM during the planning phase. And this is the longest phase. And this is also the most expensive phase. And eventually, at some point in time, every item comes to the end of its life. So that we've kind of talked about now all the different steps in the little a acquisition process. So we've talked about requirements and we've talked about little a acquisition. But wait, there's more. This is like the late night TV commercials, but wait, there's more. And what we need to talk about now is the resourcing process and how that overlays. And the third part of big A is resources, planning, programming, budget, and execution. All right. So where does PBBE fit in? PBBE fits in everywhere. It spans the whole process, cradle to grave, from the beginning of the snake chart to the end of the snake chart. Resources is always going to affect requirements, it's going to affect acquisition, and it's going to affect technology. And as a result, you can't separate one from the other. Although we put them in separate hands, you can see already, we put the requirements into one community. Requirements are owned by the military, by the service chiefs. We put acquisition into a different community. The acquisition community, the service acquisition executive, the PM, the PEOs, the milestone decision authority is a separate community. And even technology, in terms of all of the engineering centers and who owns, and all of the R&D and not operational testing, but developmental testing is in a different community. And it is often hard, we put these in different hands. It's often hard to make them work together when they are in separate hands. All right. So how does the planning, programming, budget, and execution process works? Well, it starts with the same, let me go ahead. The process, there's a DoD directive for this as well. No doubt, got to have a directive or a policy instruction. And generally what we're talking about is we are looking at a process that isn't like 1 year in concept. What we're talking about is creating a process that is going to align resources with requirements, resources with prioritized capabilities, and provides for sound financial management decisions and sound review of those financial management decisions. So that's what the process is intended to do. Now, PPBE is really 4 components. It's one complete system, but what we're talking about is planning, programming, budgeting, and execution. Planning is something that is more than a 5-year time frame, more than a 5-year fiscal time framing. Planning is looking out 7 to 10 years. That's what planning represents. Programming is looking out 5 years. The next 5-year time frame is the focus of programming. Budgeting is looking out 1 year, 1 fiscal year. And those 3 together are the steps involved in budget formulation. And then there is execution, the current money, the money that has already been appropriated by the Congress. We're talking executing funds that have been obligated by the Congress during the current year, or during, sometimes it's multi-year funds, during their period of availability. So it is, again, not trying to, just like requirements and acquisitions are a multi-year process from cradle to grave, so is budgeting. The planning, programming, budgeting, execution process. Planning, you're looking out 7 to 10 years. Programming, you're looking out 5. Budgeting, you're looking out 1. But to collectively then, once you have a budget, the execution is money that has been obligated and given to DoD by the Congress. So who owns the planning process? Well, I have to tell you this, planning starts with the same strategic guidance that the requirements community did. We talked about how the requirements community, when requirements were being developed, it was like, okay, what does the US military have to be capable of doing versus what it is currently capable of doing? And the difference, the capability gap, is how you generate requirements. Well, what were the guidance that resulted in those capability assessments? Those were the President's National Security Strategy, OSD's, SecDef's National Defense Strategy, and the Chairman's National Military Strategy. The same three documents drive budgetary planning. So the National Security Strategy, the National Defense Strategy, the National Military Strategy are the same, but now we're looking at how much defense do we need in terms of resources. And who gets to do that? Well, one of the undersecretaries of defense, USD policy. So the undersecretary of defense, we're not talking the undersecretary of defense for acquisition and sustainment, we're talking, or the undersecretary of defense for research and technology, we're talking the undersecretary of defense for policy. So based upon that strategic guidance and the chairman's recommendations, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, USDP, puts out defense planning guidance for DoD and the services. So you can see here, maybe this is a better diagram showing how we have the strategic guidance, which comes out, maybe years before the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy puts out the planning guidance. The chairman puts out the chairman's program recommendations that affect resources, and the chairman's program recommendation also influences requirements. But now we have planning guidance in terms of resources. And this will be done, you can see, over a multi-year process. What happens when that defense planning guidance is put out? Well, then the services start developing their programs. So, you can see here in the process that by now, it started a year ago, probably in 2021, where you were taking in 2021 guidance or strategic policy inputs, which then resulted now, April, May 2022, of the defense planning guidance, the current defense planning guidance for the next period of time that the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy puts out. What happens then? Well, the services then will put together two documents. They will put together their 5-year POM, Program Objective Memorandum, and their 1-year budget. So they have to go ahead by July of this year, they will put together their 5-year Program Objective Memorandum, or POM, and their 1-year budget. And they have to be done with it by the end of July. And this, folks, isn't the budget for this coming fiscal year, it's the budget for a year from now. So by July 30th, 2022, the services have to submit their POM and their budget for the fiscal year that will begin in September or October of 2023. So you've got a 5-year, it's basically 14 or 15 months between when the services release their budget and it actually begins when you actually get money for its execution. You've got to you're formulating a budget at least a year and a half, generally a year and a half, before you actually get that money. And a lot can happen in that intervening year and a half between when you came up with your budget and you released it as a service and when it actually was given to you by the Congress. So what happens? Well, come July, the services have to release their budget for FY 24, and then they give it to DoD, OSD, including the Office of Secretary of Defense, OSD CAPE. We talked about them. They will review the budget, identify issues, prioritize budgets among the services or by programs, and by early November or by November, December, the services and DoD are resolving issues in the budget. Simultaneously, DoD is sharing this with the Office of Management and Budget, with OMB, who works for the president. So, internally, OSD is trying to resolve issues with the services because DoD has not yet released its budget. It's trying to internalize and prioritize resources with what it can ask, with what OMB is telling them you can ask for, with what needs to be prioritized. And you have this issue resolution, and this happens July, August, September, October. And then what happens? Well, finally, DoD gives its budget. DoD submits its budget to OMB, and OMB will in turn put together the president's budget. And then what happens come the following February? Well, come February, and it's usually, it's supposed to be the first Tuesday in February, the president's budget is then sent to the Congress. That's the agreed upon, it's not required by law, but it's usually, not that I know of, the first Tuesday in February, the president submits the budget to the Congress for enactment. So you can see here that it was from July of the preceding year through the fall, through the winter, that the services and DoD hashed things out, and then DoD finally submits it to OMB, and then OMB does major budget resolution issues, and finally it becomes the president's budget and is submitted to the Congress generally in February of that year. This year it was actually March, but when it is submitted, it is sliced and diced in so many different ways. First, it's sliced and diced by, you can see there, major force programs. It is sliced and diced by service, and it is sliced and diced by type of appropriation. Is it R&D money, procurement dollars, MilCon, personnel, operations and maintenance, or other? So you can see that the DoD appropriation is sliced by major force program, and there's actually 12 now. My chart is old. There is number 12, which is space. So there are 12 major force programs, there are different components, and then there are different kinds of money. So it is sorted and resorted and sliced and diced a lot of different ways. And the overall the overall end result of the budgeting process is the budget submission. And this actually is the budget that DoD submitted, or that the president submitted to the Congress for DoD in March of this past year. And what does DoD want this year? $773 billion for the different services. And you can see there by military department, or the more detailed view of what, by service or by component for some of the DoD components that are not military services. You can see there what is desired in terms of dollars for 2023. And the budget is a one-year budget, but we talked about how the POM is a budget +4. So DoD provides this to the Congress as well. They will say, okay, this is what last year, FY22 looked like. This is what we want for FY23, which starts in October of 22 and runs through September of 23. We want $773 billion. But we're also showing you what our POM is, what we're looking at for for the next 5 years. So the budget looks at 1 year, but the POM is a 5-year it takes into account a 5-year programming process. And no doubt, Congress doesn't want to be surprised. And the services and programs need certainty. You need to know that your program is funded. You know that it's in the POM, it's been approved, and you're going to be not only funded in the budget year, but you're going to be funded, you can look out 5 years and know that there's adequate funding for the program. Here, for example, is the Army's Big Six initiatives and what the Army wants for each of its Big Six priorities. I used to be in the Army. I was an Army JAG. And, no doubt, the Army has requirements and major system acquisitions. And its Big Six are long-range precision fighters, next generation combat vehicle, future vertical lift, networks, air and missile defense, and service member lethality. So what you're looking at, or soldier lethality. These are the Army's Big Six programs. And each of them is somewhere on the snake chart. And you can see here what the Army wants. Now, this chart's a couple of years old, but wanted both in terms of budget and POM. This is what I want in 1 year. This is what I'm looking for over 5. So it's 1 + 4, and that's the minimum planning process. Well, planning is a loaded word. Planning means 5 to 10. Programming means 5, and budgeting means 1. Here's also, it's not just like one budget that's happening simultaneously. You've got multi things happening at any one point in time. So with regard to, you can see here today, is on the chart. Here we are in May of 2022. And this is, for the fiscal year 22, for fiscal year 22, Congress passed or enacted DoD's fiscal 22, FY22 authorization, and it is now being executed. So you are in, these dollars have been obligated, they can be spent, they can be used and put under contract. And the federal government does obligation accounting. It's not when the item is delivered that matters. It's not when payment is, when somebody invoices for payment. Obligation accounting means when did you create the legal obligation? When did you sign the contract? And that's generally the event that matters. So for fiscal year 22, those dollars have already been obligated and they are being executed. For fiscal year 23, you can see, well, the fiscal year 23 budget is with the Congress right now. It went through the planning process already, and then the POM and the budget estimate submission. The BES is a 1 year is the budget. The POM is the 5 years, the budget plus 4 more. That was already developed and given to the Congress in March. That was completed earlier this year, and now you can see that for the FY23 budget, it's with the Congress, and after it is enacted, you would then later this year, hopefully by September, October, be in execution mode. But there's also planning for the FY24 through 28 cycle and the FY25 through 29 cycle. Although you can see there that by July of FY24, the services have to submit both their program objective memorandum and the POM and the budget estimate submission, the BES, to DoD. And by next February, in not January of 23, but February of 23, you can see that process is completed, and the president would submit the budget to the Congress for its review, approval, and enactment. And no doubt the same process happens for each year in turn. So at any one point in time, in terms of financial management, you can see here, it's not only the budget that, the dollars that you currently have that you're trying to manage. It's 1 year out, it's 2 years out, it's 5 years out, it's 10 years out that you're looking at and trying to plan for as well. This here is also the fact that the money that Congress appropriates doesn't, has different, quote, periods of availability. Money is not good until spent. Money is good for a defined period of availability. Think of it like this. You go to the store and you buy, you buy a bottle of beer, and you look at the side label and it has your warnings, Surgeon General warnings, but it will also have best if consumed by this date. Okay, this is a little bit different. It has to be consumed. Money has to be spent, obligated, put under contract by a date certain, or it can no longer be used. It expires. So the types of money that Congress appropriates for DoD has different shelf lives. Now, the official term is a period of availability, but the period of availability changes with type of money. So for operation and maintenance funding, the period of availability is 1 year, 1 fiscal year, which means you have to use it by September 30th of the budget year of the execution year, or it is expired. Now, you can use expired funds to adjust pre-existing obligations. You just can't use them for new requirements. So if I have to change something about an existing contract, I probably can use, and it's in scope and it does not represent a new start. Like we thought it was going to cost us this. Well, it's actually going to cost us this. It's a cost reimbursement contract. It's a change to what it's going to cost to procure this. Well, you can use expired funds, but you can't use it for a new start or an out of scope change. So you have a 1 year period of availability followed by 5 years in which the funds are still there. They're expired. You can't use them for anything new, but you can still use them. And then the count is closed. Our R&D dollars or RDT&E dollars have a 2 year period of availability followed by a 5 year period where they're expired, meaning they can't be used for something new, but they can adjust a pre-existing obligation. Procurement dollars actually have a 3 year period of availability. So money that was given to DoD or to the Army in terms of procurement dollars in fiscal year 22 can be used in fiscal years 22, 23, or 24, which means I got the money by September of 21, and I can use it all the way until, October of 21, and I can use it all the way until September of 24. Shipbuilding generally has a 5 year period of availability, same with military construction. Personnel dollars have a 1 year period of availability. And no doubt, for any time that you're looking at resources, it's not just the amount of money that you have, but you're also looking at and have to look at the color of money. And you are matching money with purpose. So, it's like, okay, I have a period of availability, time matters, but I also have to use the right kind of money by purpose. I can't use my personnel dollars, even if I have leftover personnel dollars, for something that is really the maintenance and repair of equipment. Likewise, if I am doing research and development and I don't have enough R&D money, I can't use procurement dollars just because I have those and I don't have what I need. Financial management not only means keeping track of different budgets from a execution process as well as a planning process, but matching budget authority with what is being procured. All right. So here is kind of an overlay between funding and programming. So we talked about major defense acquisition programs, and we're talking about, the major defense acquisition pathway. This was one of those 6 pathways within the adaptive acquisition framework. And we talked about how there are different phases in the program. In any defense program, there are different phases in the acquisition timeline. So we had a material solution analysis phase where you were doing R&D, followed by attack maturation and risk reduction phase, more focused R&D. Even R&D is broken down into different there's like, I think 6 different phases within R&D. You're matching R&D funding with the fact that you are doing R&D, research, development, test, and evaluation. And the same with the fact that your R&D, your funding for development, takes you kind of through the first 3 phases within the acquisition life cycle. So you're using the right color of money, the right kind of funds for these different phases. And again, you move as fast as your slowest component. Is it your technology? Is it your is the fact that you can't fund it? Is it your acquisition and contracting management? You move as fast as your slowest, you're as strong as your weakest link. You move as fast as your slowest component. And you can see, though, that you need to be using development dollars, RDT&E dollars, when you're in these 3 phases. As you get into EMD, you can see there, well, it's like, okay, maybe now at a certain point in time, we're not just doing engineering and manufacturing anymore. We're starting to do low rate initial production. And production means we're not developing anymore. The idea that we are doing LRIP, low rate initial production, means we've validated what we're going to buy. We've proven it up. We've determined that it is sustainable, it is manufacturable, that it meets the requirements that the JROC validated initially and continues to validate. And now we're moving into production. And that decision changes color of money, or the type of money that has to be used. So during production and deployment, you're using procurement dollars for the production, and no doubt for deployment of the items, getting them shipped and fielded and operated and maintained and sustained and improved. Now we're talking, depending on what it is, you're not using production dollars anymore. You're using O&M, or operation and maintenance money as well, or personnel dollars as well. And you can see here that it's complex. It's complex in terms of what financial management represents, just like what requirements management represents and what acquisition management represents as well. All right, so how does money fit in with the snake chart? Like this, folks. It's all encompassing. You can't separate one from the other. And it is, we talked about 4 different types of management and discipline that are taking place simultaneously. You've got requirements management. You've got, managing what it is that is needed to be procured, or not procured if it was a non-material solution. That .mil PF change recommendation, where you decided and determined that a non-material solution would resolve the capability gap. We talked about acquisition management, and related to that, and we didn't even go into it a lot, is the other side of the fence, is not the acquisition community, but the contracting community. and the two have to work hand in glove. One's the buying commands or contracting officers, the people who actually have contracting authority, have to work hand in glove with the acquisition side of the house as well. And then there's the resources community and resource management or financial management, and you're overlaying, one with the other. And there's really no way that you can separate the two. So with that having been said, where are we back to? We're back to the snake chart. And just to kind of the takeaway from the beginning and what we're putting here again is you can see there's lots of events, there's a lot of intended discipline in the process, but simultaneously you're realizing that there needs to be flexibility. Because technology is always changing, requirements are always changing, budgets are always changing. There needs to be a flexibility in all of those things. There needs to be the ability to say, well, maybe we don't need to go through all of these milestones. And once we decide on a material solution, we can jump all the way through to engineering and manufacturing development. And we skip, we're not developing anything. We're just integrating systems that already exist and getting right on to rapid prototyping, rapid fielding. So we've gone through the most complex of the systems, when like the ones that mentioned where you're fielding a Joint Strike Fighter or the Arleigh Burke class destroyer or the M1 main battle tank, and all the different steps that happened in the process. But you can see it's not really one process, it's multiple systems, you have a requirements community, you have a resource community, you have a requisitioning community, the acquisition community. But I did get to my 3 R's. And it was a good way to understand the fact that these 3 lines of effort have to work in tandem, have to work with each other. But there are many stakeholders, gatekeepers, and they're in different communities. And as a result, there was an undersecretary, there was assistant secretary of the Army, when was Ms. Hsu? Heidi Hsu was the ASALT. And she mentioned that, in terms of any major system acquisition, you give one person a steering wheel and 20 people have brakes. It's one way to understand why there's such frustration with, what it takes to get things done. Because you have multiple lines of effort, one involving technology, one involving requirements, one involving acquisition. And we didn't even put the contracting folks in here. They're just a tool to turn acquisitions into contracts, acquisition strategies into contract documents. But really, the chart would get way too complex if I added contracting, which happens at every step along the way, really. I mean, no doubt, contracts are awarded and contractors help provide advisory services for the requirements community. Contracts are awarded and contractors provide advisory services to the financial management community or the acquisition community. And contractors are actually the vehicle by which these major defense acquisition programs are turned into items of supply, software, defense business systems, services. They're essential to that as well. And hopefully now contractors can see what DoD is up against. And for those people who are here today who are from DoD, from military agencies, you can see how your little piece kind of fits into the overall whole, where, what is happening in your community, what you're working on, how it impacts the other lines of effort that are happening. and what it takes to get something done. I said that I was going to leave about 15 minutes for questions, and I've kind of done that. We start where we finished, understanding that the big A defense acquisition system is really three component systems. You have a requirement system, a resourcing system, and a little a acquisition or requisitioning system. And no doubt, it works best when they work together. So with that having been said, we'll go ahead and look at the chat to see what we've got in terms of questions that are coming in.
Lou, you'll see that there are questions in the chat, and we also have some in the Q&A as well.
Okay, I'm looking through the chat right now. Okay, here's one question. At some point, would Lou reflect on what can be done to influence acquisition personnel and contracting officers to be more welcoming of small business entities with capabilities to meet DoD needs? Yeah, I mean, no doubt, there are a lot of ways in which this can occur. There's a lot of times where, there was a book that I read not too long ago about Churchill and the UK, and it was Churchill's Department of Ungentlemanly Warfare, I think was the name of the book. And it focused on the fact that a lot of times small businesses, startups, are not just, the crackpot in the garage, but actually represent somebody with a great idea, but they're not going to be a large business. They just have somebody, it might be a very small business, could be a startup business, but they have a great idea. And I think that DoD recognizes that it needs to be more welcoming of these people with ideas. There's a big emphasis on or use on SBIR, small business innovative research. There's a big use on small business tech transfers, STTR. There's a big emphasis and use on other transaction authority for companies that don't want to be, your regular quote defense contractor. They're somebody who is a non-traditional defense contractor, I think is the term of art that is being used. And often, the use of SBIR, the SBIR program, where DoD is just funding innovative research or research ideas, is a great way for small businesses to get involved in this community. No doubt, though, that if it's a great idea, and it actually is worth pursuing and it can be rapidly prototyped or rapidly fielded or both, there comes a point in time where, from a business perspective, this small business can make one of them or a few of them. But if DoD says, okay, I want 1 million, I really like this. We're going to add, we're going to make this part of, a new piece of equipment or replace an existing piece of equipment. And we want to field it to every soldier that we have. And it's like, well, that small business then reaches a point where it doesn't have that manufacturing capability. It has an idea capability. It can prototype one. But at that point in time, the small business may not be the same business that can take that idea into a production or into a mass production. And then it becomes a question of, well, what happens next then? Does the small business sell itself out to a Lockheed or to a Boeing, because it is it is at its maximum net worth? Is this a situation where the Army buys the technology, including all data rights to that capability or to that item, be it hardware or software or both. So no doubt there is opportunities for, I think DoD realizes that all good ideas are not, found in large companies. Just like I always joke internally that, the people within the Pentagon do not have a monopoly on the good idea fairy. They should, often should not mandate policy, but and then people have to ask for a waiver of policy. I always keep saying, well, why not just take all the policy guidance and make it best practices? This is what we think you should do, but it's not mandatory and you don't need permission to deviate from it. I haven't sold DoD on that idea yet, unfortunately. But, yes, policy guidance can be as stifling as it is helpful. And likewise, there are a lot of great ideas and ways for DoD to interface with the sourcing of which for ideas is small contractors as well as large contractors. All right, what other questions do we have here? What challenges, what challenges do they face in contract management given the scope of procurement requirements which are handled by the defense sector? Let me take the easier question first. How long did it take the F-35 to complete the process? I love that question. It hasn't been completed. If you're talking, if you're talking development and production, I think that we are still in production. It has not. It has been fielded. I think it has gone through initial operational capability, and I'm not sure though that DoD, the F-35 has finished all of its production. There are still units that are being produced and built. I think that the both, for U.S. use and for foreign military sales use, and then how much longer will it last through the end of its life cycle? Longer than we will, I would say. It's going to be around for quite a while. So I don't think it's done even through maybe full operational capability, meaning it's been fielded to to all intended units yet. And that becomes part of the process as well, where the services, and this is, we won't even have something that we won't have a lot of time to look at, where the services might say, okay, we require 100 of these, but given the amount of funding that we have, the resources that we have, we can only buy 50. What happens to the other 50? Well, they're considered an unfunded requirement, which means, program managers are looking for funding in order to procure the units which have been authorized by the service and are required by the service, but have not yet been funded. Simultaneously, you have Army or service units who are entitled to a piece of equipment, but they don't have it yet, but it's on the books as an unfunded requirement. So there is a process for managing an item from the management side, from the, I guess, material management side, both funded and unfunded requirements, where it is an approved requirement, where it is like, okay, it's approved to buy X number of these, but we can't get all of them yet. We didn't even get a chance to talk about that. Another question is, well, will there be a separate session on sustainment acquisitions? Maybe. I haven't thought about that yet, folks. No doubt the biggest, the biggest, the most costliest phase of the phases was sustainment. In terms of operating it, maintaining it, enhancing it, improving it, sustaining it. resets, for each one of these, pieces of equipment that's fielded. There's often, there will be field level maintenance. There could be depot level maintenance, stuff that soldiers can do on their own without having to take the system, the tank, whatever it happens to be, and sending it to a depot for overhaul and repair. But then there's depot level maintenance, which is part of sustainment, as well as reset. Taking it back to basically taking it back. If we had hours on the system, we're resetting it to 0. So it is no doubt a lengthy. I'll think about that if we want to have one on sustainment as well. Jessica, I'm about out of time. So absent any really pressing questions, I'll hand it back to you. We're almost at the end of our day.
I know. How about that? I just wanted to say a big thank you to Lou for such an incredible session. First of all, we had such an amazing group of people here. We had over 200 people at one point. So clearly there's a lot of interest in this. So thank you for that outstanding presentation, which will be the recording of which will be on the event page following this. And a link will come from Zoom automatically with a reminder of the event page location. So again, thank you to you for your time and your energy and your enthusiasm and knowledge. Thank you to everyone who joined us. And then finally, a reminder to join us this time next week for the session, the panel discussion about defense acquisition system policies with Lou, Wendy Tsai, Karen Thornton, and Steve Schooner. That session, unlike today's, will not be recorded. So please plan to join us live if you want to join next week's session. Unlike today, where the recording will be made available, it will not be made available next week. So please make sure to join us live. And with that, thank you to everyone. And we will hopefully see you next week. Thanks again, Lou. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for your help.